Even though I have traveled all the roads, crossed mountains and valleys from east to west, if I have not discovered the freedom to be myself, I have not gotten anywhere. Even if I'd shared all my goods with people of another language and culture, made friends with pilgrims of 1,000 paths, or shared hostels with saints and princes, if I am not able to forgive my neighbor tomorrow, I have not gotten anywhere. Well, hello and welcome to the Being Formed podcast. My name is Adam Ormord. I am the host of the show, as well as the president and the co-founder of LifePoint Resources. And you know what? We're back. It's been a while since our last podcast episode because I was on a 2-month sabbatical and I was walking something called the Camino de Santiago. And the Camino is one of those things that's kind of like, if you know, you know. So maybe you're familiar with the Camino, or maybe this is brand new to you. I really hope that you will engage in today's conversation. It's a great one. I had an opportunity to meet someone on the Camino, a pastor from Arizona. His name is Jim Powell, and he's our guest for today's podcast. It's a little long. I want to warn you about that. But also, I would really encourage you to stick with it. Really listen in to everything we have to share with you today. The opening of today's podcast was just a bit of a poem I came across while I was on the Camino. At the end of today's episode, I'll read the entire thing, this beautiful poem. But right now, let me just introduce you to Jim Powell. Jim is a lead pastor of Palm West Community Church in Sun City West, Arizona. Prior to this, Jim served for 21 years as a lead pastor of Richwoods Christian Church in Peoria, Illinois. Jim's also the founding director of the 95 Network, a nonprofit dedicated to equipping and encouraging small to mid-sized congregations. Jim is a widower also. His wife of 35 years passed away in September 2024. Jim has 2 sons, Timothy and Trevor. He's also an avid pickleball player. Jim's the author of a book called Dirt Matters, The Foundation for a Healthy, Vibrant, and Effective Congregation. He's a frequent speaker at conferences and ministry events. Jim's work has been featured in Leadership Journal, Outreach Magazine, Christianity Today, Guideposts, Christian Standard, churchleaders.com, and more. Above all else, Jim is a faithful and humble follower of Jesus on the way, and I'm grateful to call him my friend. So, are you ready? Let's welcome Jim to the show. Jim Powell, welcome to the Being Formed podcast. I am so glad to see you here, even though we're on video, because we got to spend some pretty serious time together on the Camino, and I'm excited to have you as my guest here today so we can actually talk about what went down, what happened to you, what happens, I think, on the Camino. And so I'm just thrilled. I'm thrilled that I had a chance to meet you, Jim. I'm thrilled that we had some great conversations on the path. And I'm grateful that you said yes to doing this podcast because I think you have a lot of wisdom as a pastor to share with us. And so I want to just jump right in, Jim, and ask you, how is it with your soul?
Oh, man. Well, right now, my soul is good. I am this summer I'm on sabbatical, and so it's just been wonderful. I'm resting. I am reading. The Camino experiences we'll talk about was just tremendous, and I've got a few more things that I'm going to be doing this summer as a part of my experience. But the Lord has been very, very good to me, and I feel really have been abiding in great ways during the course of this experience, this sabbatical.
Good. Yes. Well, we want to get to know you more, Jim. And so I'm asking if you'd be willing to share your story, some of your story with our listeners, really around the idea of how you found your way into pastoral ministry, maybe where you grew up, what was that calling experience like for you, even, what ministry has looked like for you over the years.
Well, thank you. I was raised in West Central Illinois. One side of my family, I had grandparents that were devout Lutherans. They were wonderful people. Started to go to church with my mother as a child and a teenager. I got confirmed into the Missouri Synod Church, but really didn't have a relationship with the Lord. In college, I considered myself an agnostic, had walked away, was in the world with both feet. And during that time, I came across a book called Power for Living by Jamie Buckingham. It had the testimonies of a number of professional athletes, which really opened my heart. I prayed to receive the Lord, but when it came to the section that talked about giving your life to Christ as Lord, I literally tossed the book down and said, that's ridiculous. Like, I can believe in God, but there's no way He's the most important thing in my life. Like, I'm in control, right? And so it was a period of several weeks later before the Lord broke me. I came home on Sunday evening, March 24, 1985, and I was the end of myself. I dropped down on my knees, the end of my bed. I said, okay, God, I'm giving it to you. I'm gonna surrender to you as Lord, not just Savior. And I had a conversion experience. I'd never read 2 Corinthians 5:17, but the first time I did, like that was my verse. You were in, anyone who's in Christ, a new creation.
Hmm.
When Samuel selected Saul, the Bible said when Saul turned, God changed his heart. And I had that kind of conversion. I woke up the next day, opened the Bible, it just came alive to me. And I immediately felt called into ministry, even though I didn't see myself wearing a robe and, doing what I had always seen a lot of the Lutheran pastors, which no affront to them. I'm just saying my
Hmm.
personality is more outgoing. But I felt called and began the journey at that point.
Hmm.
Went to Bible college in South Carolina, Columbia Bible College, Columbia University for 1 year, and then finished my bachelor's degree in Theology and Religious Studies. Shortly after graduating, I had a small rural church in West Central Illinois that asked me to supply preach, and then they offered me a position as the lead pastor. So it was a smaller church, but at 26, I'm like, I don't think I'm ready yet. But some of my mentors said, I think you need to say yes, and so I started ministry at 26, and then went to seminary in Illinois and got my master's in theology and philosophy. After I finished seminary, I went to a church in Peoria, Illinois, and it was a small independent Christian church that over my time there grew from a small little single cell church to a very large congregation with multiple campuses. During that time, my wife had a very serious illness called stiff person syndrome. I was getting burned out. I was just over my skis. I was overextended, was not healthy spiritually or physically, and I felt like the well had dried up. It was time to resign, and the Lord gave me a vision about pastoring in a retirement community. So I'm here in Arizona. I moved here 6 years ago. We thought the warmer weather would be good for my wife's health, and I just felt compelled to something a little slower, a little bit. So I downsized to a church about a fourth of the size of my previous church, but it's been a great move. I love my church. I love my church family here in Arizona, and I'm as good or better than I've been in a long time.
Thank you for sharing. You're a communicator. So I know you like to communicate and teach, and often teachers use pictures and metaphors and ways to explain things. And so, as you've thought about your own journey with God or life with God, what kind of picture or metaphor do you connect with? How would you describe what life with God is like?
Well, I would use people more, models more than I would images. I'm getting ready to start the Ignatian exercises for the
Hmm.
first time this fall. I'm going to go through that, and I'm really excited about that journey. But I'm not good with that imaginative stuff. I'm not quite as good with that, and so, but I am a Martha who is pursuing trying to become more of a Mary. I am achiever. I am a one of my spiritual gifts is leadership, but I sometimes get too focused on doing rather than being.
Mm.
And so that's my journey that I've been on and where I'm at and where I'm really trying to grow in that formation journey of allowing Mary to come out more in me as opposed to Martha.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, it served you well, didn't it, to be an achiever and focused on leadership and able to get things done. And I'm sure the church growth movement that you were definitely a part of helped motivate you towards those ends. And yeah, it's awesome to see that here you are in your sabbatical season, and you're just focused on being. And I'm sure you have been for a few years, right? But
I'm trying. It's still a battle, to achieve as opposed to be present. But to your point, though, I think the things that God has been able to do in and through me there's a lot of good that's come out of that.
right.
But I feel like Moses striking the rock.
Mm,
Sometimes you can get results, but it
mm,
doesn't always mean that they are healthy results or that it's really the way that God intends. Does that make sense?
yes.
And so I feel like that's the journey I've been on, is to try to not just manufacture ministry or
Mm,
to drive ministry, but to try to be to move slower, to allow God to feel like the Lord is working through
mm,
it in His timing.
mm,
Um, so yeah, that's been part of my challenge in my flesh spirit. But I've had some good mentors and some good people, and God continues to bring people in
mm.
my life like you, Adam, that are encouraging and inspiring me to continue to grow in my formation journey.
Can we go back to Peoria, Illinois? You mentioned that you were over your skis and you were starting to experience burnout. How did you how did you experience burnout? What were you noticing? What were others noticing or even calling out?
I was tired.
Okay.
I had no creativity. Like I just felt like every week was a grind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was no creative flow coming out of me. It was just everything was work. I was exhausted all the time. I took a couple of breaks and I would just be like taking a nap. Like I just
Mm-hmm.
felt a little burst of energy when you wake up and then it's like I'm dead again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put together a clearing committee
Mm-hmm.
of people to help speak into my life. And one day I was meeting with them talking, and a woman who was on staff at my church who's in ministry now, and she was also my wife's best friend, Melissa, said to me, she said, Jim, she goes, there's no living water coming out of you. It's like you're pumping the well, trying to get anything you can to be able to do the ministry you're supposed to do. And that analogy spoke to me because it was true. I was pumping the well, trying to get anything I could where there was no living water flowing out of me. And that was a real moment where the realization of my soul was not very healthy and everything I was trying was not working.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no vision. Adam, I've always been a leader with vision. I got up in front of my church 2 years in a row at sort of our annual meeting and said, guys, I don't know what's next. And the only thing that I can say that's worse than not having a vision is trying to manufacture one in your flesh because you're supposed to have one.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, as a leader, to not have a vision of where you think the church is supposed to go, and you're just sort of doing church week in, week out, all those things converged to where it became very evident that that season had been very fruitful, but it was time to go a new direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Jim, you mentioned that you're on a sabbatical and there's still more to come. You're not done with your sabbatical yet. But one of the things you mentioned to me is that you have a plan to go whitewater rafting or down the Grand Canyon, right? With your son going through the Colorado River, through the canyon. And that sounds amazing. I want to just put out here this image of our spiritual life, kind of like the river. And this is some teaching that I've loved from a good friend of mine named Joe Chambers, who is a friend of yours too. He talks about the spiritual life being like a river, and much of our early stages in development in the river are kind of our growing in Christ and our learning how to serve. This is very critical journey kind of stuff. But in the language of Joe Chambers, instead of talking about a wall that we hit, he talks about facing the rapids.
Hmm. I like it.
I like it too because the rapids, like a class 5 rapids, is scary as all get out, but you can survive it. You can get through it. You need a guide. You need somebody to help you through this, someone who is familiar with it, someone who isn't going to do the work for you, but is going to point out the real important things that you need to be aware of and guide you down this rapid. And really, the rapids are anything in our life that we can't navigate around. Oftentimes we might try to go back or try to stay in an eddy perhaps so we don't have to go down the rapids. But eventually I think there's an invitation for us to move through these really hard seasons of our life that cause us to challenge our notions of who God is, who we are, what is this life about, what are we really living for, where's our identity, what kind of transformation are we actually partnering with God to achieve in our own lives.
Hmm.
So that's the rapids. And I would just like to ask you, what are some of the rapids you've faced in your own life?
So I would say there's a few that come to mind. One is just my own flesh. Like I said, I can be so driven. I just, like Martha, I'm just so driven sometimes that I try to accomplish more than God's asking me to accomplish. That's my flesh, and so that's always a battle. I think my wife was very sick with her illness. Started in 2010. She was a very independent person, had to stop working, walker, then a wheelchair, so the last 5 years, I was a full-time caregiver, 4 or 5 years before she passed away last year. That was a challenge to have all that responsibility and to see the person you marry just sort of shrinking away physically, but also emotionally. That was very difficult. That was the hardest part, to see her dying, not just physically, but emotionally. To see her changing. So that was a very very difficult challenge. And then of course when you're in ministry, if you have a heart for the Lord and for people, and anytime you take on any kind of a leadership role, you're going to take hits. People are going to judge your heart. They're going to judge your motive. Sometimes we make mistakes as leaders. Sometimes we're doing what we're supposed to do, but people don't understand why we're doing it. And so, you take criticisms. You have people who just criticize, and they don't just criticize your actions, but they criticize your heart. So those are some of the things that have always been a challenge to me, is just dealing with my own flesh, trying to abide and to walk with the Lord at His pace,
Mm-hmm.
and facing criticism from people that I think is unfair. But I think as I mature, that doesn't bother me as much as it used to when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are just a few of the challenges, the rapids.
Mm-hmm.
So in this season of life, I think that the church fathers would often talk about something called acedia, which is like a spiritual boredom, where they would
Mm-hmm.
get caught up in doing all the things they were doing, but they just felt a disconnection, a boredom. And I think is that sometimes I can battle a little acedia, to where I'm like reading, and as you get more mature, you learn stuff like it's just sometimes like, am I going to stay faithful and just press through to seek the Lord, whether I feel or get anything out of this? Sort of like
Mm-hmm.
Mother Teresa's an extreme of what she went through. When she really had some very difficult years of feeling nothing. Being faithful but feeling nothing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes, as I think in this season of life I'm now, it's like to stay faithful, to pursue, to wait on the Lord, to practice things like silent prayer, things like that, even if I don't feel an immediate benefit from that.
Yeah.
Staying faithful in those things without feeling like I'm getting immediate results, because I'm
Mm.
wired to be an achiever, and I like getting results.
Mm.
But you don't always have that when you're trying to abide and walk with the Lord. You're staying faithful.
Mm-hmm. Yes, wise words. So it strikes me that you were leading and serving and ministering and working with or for, or however you'd view this, God, while we're going through some really hard stuff in your life with your wife and her sickness and her illness, her passing. Jim, was that the catalyst for you determining it was time to take a sabbatical, or did anybody speak into your life to say, "Hey, this is really important, and it's important now"?
It's a great question. And for people that are listening to this podcast, I hope they listen very clearly to what I'm going to say.
Mhm.
This was not my idea. And if it were up to me, I would feel, I feel guilty about asking for an extended sabbatical. So in 35 years of ministry, Adam, I had one 4-week break.
Mhm.
And because I'm like, well, like, I just feel like, well, most people don't get that in their job, right?
Yep.
So that people pleaser in me, that insecurity in me, that unhealthy drive in me, but when I came to the church I'm at right now, because of previous ministers that had been to that church, they wrote into my contract that I would have a sabbatical every 5 to 7 years.
Mhm. Hmm.
And so that was in the contract when I came. And so I'm very thankful for that because I don't think I had the maturity. I would just keep grinding through as opposed to saying, hey, I think this is healthy for me. And I think it's healthy for the church. You know, Paul, you look at the apostles, even Jesus, they had rhythms. They would be offline for significant periods of time.
Yeah.
And then they would re-engage in this intense ministry where we do ministry 52, 50 weeks out of the year with a quick vacation that we
Yep.
rush together the family and then we fly, go someplace and do something. But I don't think we have those kind of rhythms of being offline for weeks or months to be able to hear God just to get refreshed, renewed. So thankfully, I have leadership that said, "Hey, we want to give this to you." And before I even started, and then as it came time in my 5-year time for my sabbatical, one of my leaders said, "Hey, I've been doing some research, and there's a grant to the Lilly Foundation that's available to clergy. I think we should apply for it if you're open to it." And so, thankfully, God brought some people that helped provide the impetus to take the
Hmm.
sabbatical, but also to apply for the grant, which has enabled me to do things I would not normally be able to do.
And one of those things is the Camino de Santiago. How and when did you first hear about the Camino? Was this recent? Was this around this conversation of sabbatical?
I had a spiritual director named Tim Reist who mentioned it to me several years ago and
Mhm.
sort of got it on the radar. And so I've thought about it off and on. And then, when I started to apply for this grant, basically the theme of the grant is what makes your heart sing, what's going to make you come alive. And so the theme of my grant was adventure and presence. Like
Mhm.
I like taking adventures and doing new things, but also I want to just walk in God's presence. And so one of the main elements of my sabbatical that I did was I thought this is an opportunity to do the Camino, right?
Mhm.
And both of those things are present, right? You're taking this adventure of walking this path, and you're really able to be present with the Lord and other pilgrims while doing it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the more I got into it, the more I began to research it, the more I got energized, the more excited I got, and it did not disappoint.
Mhm. Yeah. Let's talk about pilgrimage just for a minute. The practice of pilgrimage, I think, is something of a lost art, especially if you are from the United States or maybe even uh, from an evangelical church. So, Pastor Jim, can you help our listeners understand, even from a biblical perspective, what is the
Yes.
purpose of pilgrimage and like, who's it for? Why do we want to engage in this physical act of walking?
So I would say a couple things about that. I think first of all, let's start biblically. Abraham was a pilgrim. God
Mhm.
called him to go to a land he didn't yet know. He packs up everything and travels across the land to go. Then he arrives and there's a famine. He has to go to Egypt and come back. So he's on this journey of following, walking by faith. The Israelites were pilgrims as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years.
Mhm.
You see this theme. Jesus every year took a pilgrimage, as even as a child from Nazareth would travel all the way into Jerusalem to celebrate
Mhm.
meals, which was, potentially we don't know for sure, but a 5 to 10 day journey that they would take each way to go to celebrate the feast and the Passover there in Jerusalem. Even Jesus in his adult ministry, during the times of the feast and festivals, he would set out. Luke 9 says he resolutely set out. His last trip back to Jerusalem. Paul is doing ministry in the Mediterranean, and the Bible says that he feels compelled in Acts 19:20 to go back to Jerusalem. I don't know what
Mhm.
awaits me there, but I have to go back to Jerusalem, Paul said, even though people begged him not to go. So you find in the Bible these people that are being pulled or being drawn to go back there. In Hebrews 11, it says we are foreigners and strangers or aliens, right? All these words are used to describe our journey on this earth. And so it is grounded biblically. Um, you have this idea of a pilgrim as a person who is moving towards a destination and they are in a journey.
Mhm.
And they are doing so they're seeking something, they're seeking God, they're seeking spiritually. As a spiritual pilgrim, we are seeking God, we're seeking something. And so you're going to a place, you're taking this trip, but you're doing so because you're pursuing
Mhm.
not the end in and of itself, but you're pursuing God because God's
Yeah.
doing something there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, The problem with pilgrimages, though, and why most Protestants don't have any awareness or any focus upon them, is because there were abuses that began to arise. Now, even in America, think about this. The people who founded our country were called what? Pilgrims.
That's
They were
right.
religious people who said, hey, we're taking this journey across, we're coming to start, because it was an intensely religious experience for them to come to
Hmm.
America, right?
Yeah.
So this idea has always been there, but during the Middle Ages, at the time of the Reformation, there was great abuses because what had happened at that time in the Catholic Church, there was an overemphasis upon icons. There were, you could buy pieces of the cross of Jesus. You could do all this stuff. Pilgrimage had often been associated with penance. If you walk to Rome, you're going to have all these sins forgiven. Your grandmother's going to go to heaven. So you began to have these abuses to where pilgrimage became associated with a works-based salvation. It became associated more so with the icons and the saints than the God behind them.
Hmm.
Is about, we need to go to touch this saint or have this
Hmm.
saint touch me. So you begin to have all of these abuses that are taking place. It became big business. The church and other people were making money off people selling these different, selling these icons and different things like this. So there were all these abuses, and because of that, John Calvin jokingly said, you could fill a mansion with all the pieces of the cross of Christ, right? And because there were so many of these fake pieces of the cross going around. Martin Luther said all pilgrimages need to be done away with. They're
Hmm.
not biblically commanded and they're being abused, and so they do no purpose. So what happened is the Protestants took the idea of pilgrimage because of the abuses that were legitimate, and they threw the baby out with the bathwater, proverbially speaking.
Hmm.
And so within the Protestant tradition, they just have not been emphasized by a lot of the predominant Protestant denominations. Even though there are still sects of Protestants that have still focused on the idea and the theme of pilgrimage. John Bunyan wrote what many would argue is the second most translated and read book of all time outside of the Bible, in Pilgrim's Progress.
Hmm.
So you still have this theme of pilgrimage that people have latched a hold of and held on to, even though it has not been emphasized in the Protestant church as much.
Let's just dig in just a bit closer then. So, how does this physical act of walking draw us closer to God? I mean, any sense of that? I mean, universally, or yeah.
So I think going back, it's attributed to St. Francis, but going back to even Greek philosophers had a Latin phrase. I'm not Latin's not good. Salvator ambulando or something like this, but it means it's solved by walking.
Hmm.
It's solved by walking. When we walk, there is a rhythm that you get into. There is a ease that you have when you walk. It's not as stressful as driving on the interstate, right? You're just walking.
Hmm.
It's like, think about how many times we get some of our best thoughts in the shower, right? Because we're just sort of relaxed.
Hmm.
In Genesis, the early chapters of Genesis, the Lord walks in the garden at the cool of the day. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more. So you have all these analogies of walking, of moving in the Bible. And I think that when we are walking and in movement, spiritually especially on a spiritual pilgrimage, that we're moving and you get in this rhythm, and you're doing so as you're able to have this the time to be able to focus, to pray, to memorize scripture, to reflect, to contemplate on your life. And to me, like it's in some ways it's easier for me to contemplate in movement than it is kneeling down next to my bed or sitting on the couch.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so we're all wired differently, but I think pilgrimage is this idea of you're out of your normal routine, you're moving, and you're doing so in the sense of pursuing or seeking or abiding with God. And
Hmm.
in that space, God does things inside of our heart and our mind that are just hard to articulate, aren't they?
Yeah. Yes, they are. I think this is a good spot to just share a bit of our story, Jim, about how we met on the Camino. So I'm going to just share from my perspective.
Yes.
You can share from yours. Uh, I determined to only post pictures online and stuff like once a week. I didn't want to be caught in this rhythm of performing, even in that regard. So I had posted a few weeks into my pilgrimage, which was 40 days, and we started at the exact same spot. But we hadn't met each other, and we certainly didn't know each other before the Camino. So anyway, at some point in time, I went on the Facebook, and a friend of mine, who I consider to be one of my pastors, is a guy named Joe Chambers. And Joe made a comment on my Facebook page that said, I have a friend named Jim Powell walking the Camino. If you see him, say hi. And I thought that was funny. And I thought, well, what that has to be tongue in cheek, right, Joe? Because like, what are the chances you're going to see a guy named Jim Powell, your friend, on the Camino? I mean, what path is he on? What, where is he on the path? So this is no joke. The very next morning, after I responded to him saying, sure, if I see Jim Powell, I'll say hi. The next morning, I was in Leon, Spain, with a couple other guys, a father-son duo from Minnesota, great guys. And we were walking to the sporting goods store, and it was in the morning. We had already walked to the cathedral and toured that. And I really liked these guys. We wanted to hang out as much as we could while we were in Leon. And so I said, hey, what are you guys doing for lunch? And they said, well, we're going to Taco Bell. We're going to Taco Bell to meet a guy named Jim. And I said, what's his last name? And they're like, well, I don't really know, but let's look and see. So they looked on their WhatsApp or whatever, came back and said, Jim Powell. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is amazing. Literally just last night, 3 weeks in or whatever it was, I heard your name. And the next morning, the next day at Taco Bell,
Yes,
I'm sitting across the table from you. So that is a huge providential surprise from God. And the timing of it was amazing to me. What was it like from your perspective?
the same thing. The other part of the story I would add is that I was in Leon, and so I felt prompted by the Lord to spend the night in Leon. Like my initial plan was not to take any rest days. It was to walk straight through unless I got sick or I had to. And so I was in Leon, and my body was a little tired, and I was talking to one of my friends on the phone, that night. I'm like, I just feel like the Lord is telling me I need to spend the night here and just take a rest day in Leon. And I said, but I want to just keep going, but I really feel like I'm supposed to do this. And my friend's like, well, Jim, you know what you're supposed to do, just do it, So I got off the phone and I went down to the place I was staying, and I said, hey, is my room available one more night? And they said, let me check. And they go, well, actually it is available one more night, but not two. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to stay one more night. So the day that we met was the day the day before that afternoon or evening is when I made this spontaneous decision to say, I'm just going to stay one more day.
Yeah.
So it was the same way. I felt like it was a divine appointment. And then once we started talking, we had so many connections. We had a kindred spirit. And then, the day or two after that, when we walked together, we had a wonderful time walking and sharing our lives together. Yeah.
Yeah. It was amazing. It was cool also for me to communicate back to Joe that happened in that way. He was blown away by that, Joe Chambers. And if anybody recognizes that name, Joe is one of our podcast guests. If you go back and look at a previous episode, you'll find his stuff there. Love that guy very much. And so it was really cool for Joe too, to have his faith, I think, even strengthened by hearing the amazing story of how we met. And of course, you're talking about serving in ministry out at like Sun City West, I think, area out in Arizona. Man, I'd spent years working out in that region as well, out in Surprise. And we knew a lot of the same people in that space there, in that church space, as well as even in spiritual direction and formational space. And so that was a real gift, a great providential gift of God for me. And I think it was for you too. I forgot about the fact that you were going to go on that day, and something was prompting you to remain and stay another day. So, yeah.
It was awesome. It was great.
That's kind of a neat little side here about just the responsiveness, the freedom and the flow and the responsiveness that we can experience, I think, on the Camino, and pay attention to that kind of internal movement of the Spirit. We don't always know that that's what that is, but, on the Camino, I had multiple experiences like that where I was just thinking, I'd like to go back and take a picture of that thing, but I'm already a quarter of a mile past. And, if I were to turn around and go back, what what will it look like for all these other pilgrims like passing me going, it'll look like I did something wrong. Like I forgot something, like I'm going the wrong way, like I don't know what I'm doing, right? But even in my own spirit, I sensed, go back. If that's what you want to do, go back and get that picture. And then I would, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing people again who I saw a few days earlier, and this little reunion happens because of that responsiveness, right? And so learning to even recognize, I think, the voice of God, powerful thing, I think, on the Camino.
Absolutely. And like you said, when you, I mean, it sounds so pathetic, to say this, but when you trust those promptings, you follow those leadings, and it's like you have these connections, and you see somebody you never thought you'd see again, or you meet someone new.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still staying in contact with several people I met along the path, believers and non-believers, that are just different places in their what they're seeking and where they are.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many divine appointments that you have, so many experiences that you connect with God and with people. But like you said, I think being in that space, you're so locked in, because like you're on this singular focus on this journey, to where I think sometimes we talk ourselves out of things,
Mm-hmm.
or we become so distracted by busyness that like we just sort of neglect those promptings.
Mm-hmm.
Where there, I think it's just easier to be in tune to those things and to be able to
Yes.
process them. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that is it. Okay, so I like to kind of say that pilgrimage is a spiritual practice, the spiritual practice of pilgrimage. But I think that within pilgrimage is contained many other kind of spiritual practices that we get to engage in as we're doing this pilgrimage. What were some of the practices that came alive for you over those days, those weeks on the path?
So I think the biggest one for me that really, as I brought back, that I'm like, I've got to step into this, is scripture memorization.
Mm-hmm.
There were days when I was alone that I just started to recite scriptures, and just reciting them and reflecting upon them and meditating upon one verse, where I would just repeat it multiple times and try to reflect upon that verse.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul told the Philippians, he said, only live up to what you've already attained. Because sometimes I think in our journey, there's things we do and then we get sidetracked and we look for something different or new. And I feel like, I used to memorize a lot of scriptures the last several years, like, it's like, but I feel like on the Camino, I don't feel like I know, like scripture memorization and reciting and reflecting on scriptures, small passages, entire chapters, like the 23rd Psalm while I'm walking, really helped me to abide and to
Mm-hmm.
feel like I was walking with God. And that's something I want to bring back. Obviously the practice of prayer, I think community, just being aware of the people God brings in your life and seeing those people that you meet as opportunities
Yep.
to receive and to give. Those are some big ones for me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm with you on the scripture memorization. Um, what were some of the passages besides this 23rd Psalm that you did notice continually coming back up, that you wanted to be reciting and holding before the Lord?
There were some passages on presence. Just Psalm, I think it's Psalm 16, David says, I always set the Lord before me. The Lord is set before me always.
Mm-hmm.
Passages like that were about presence.
Yeah.
There was a verse in Isaiah 58 that was very meaningful to me, that I kept, reciting, reflecting upon. There was a number of those that were like just about being present with the Lord, that I kept
Yeah.
and found myself that kind of thematic,
Mm-hmm.
that theme of verses. But, yeah.
Yeah, man. I actually, I didn't do it right away. I wanted to, but I actually as I got closer to the end of my journey, I started to really work on memorizing Psalm 139 and nailed that, and it's cool now because I'm reciting it back here, and I can actually go right back in my mind and my body even and sense where I was on the path
Mhm.
as I was working on that particular verse or those verses, and just the way that whole entire chapter came alive for me on the Camino, and it is reverberating and echoing through my soul. Very powerful. Psalm 27, verse 4. One thing I ask of the Lord. This is
Yes.
another one. that I would dwell in the house of the Lord. And as I would be walking, I'd be like, God, this is your house. I'm dwelling in your house, and I get to be here to do this and to contemplate you in your temple, your creation.
Yes.
Psalm 131, my heart isn't lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. I've calmed and quieted my soul.
Yes.
So that 23rd Psalm, there's so many ways in which some of my favorite passages in Scripture that use the language of the way came alive for me as I was on the way, right?
Yes.
So even the very end of Psalm 139, search my heart, oh God, and know my thoughts, and test me and know what's all inside me, and lead me on your way, the way everlasting, the good way. And so it was just so powerful for me. I'm with you. I've had seasons where I could memorize great chunks of Scripture, but there was something special about doing that on the pilgrimage and seeing how God was like literally like real time, like giving back to me visions and ways in which I was actually living into these passages with him, not just about him, but with him on the way. So it was beautiful.
That's the key, I think, Adam, is with, right? It's like, I feel like on the Camino, there's a focus we're able to maintain to where you feel like you're doing these things with God as you're journeying, and you're meeting other pilgrims, but you just have that kind of that focus that where you're really able. At least for me, I was able to abide and focusing upon scriptures, reciting Bible verses. It just helped me to just to abide more closely, and it just lifted my spirit, my soul, my mind to. As it says, to think about things above and not things on earth, just to be able to walk and to abide with the Lord, even as I'm going through this journey and experience.
What did you learn about yourself, about God, just about this incredible with God life we all get to enjoy?
So my first couple of weeks back from my sabbatical, I've got a couple of weeks where I'm just going to sort of do reflections from my sabbatical. And the first message I'm going to do, I have no doubt, is when I was in Sahagun, which is the halfway point of the Camino, I stayed in a Benedictine monastery with some, it was old Benedictine monastery, but it's now run by some Marist priest. And so they had this little thing where they had you in circle, and they said, hey, we have this table full of all these images. They had about 70, 80 cards there that had different images. They said, pick out the image that speaks to you. And so I went, and people had sunshine and all these different things, these different, and so I saw one, and the one that I grabbed was a picture of a glass that was half full. And they said, why did you choose that? And I said, because on the Camino, I feel like the Lord reinforced a very important lesson to me, where in my life, I can allow myself to get so full that there's no margin for the Lord. To where I'm working for God, not with God.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a phrase that says, you cannot fill a cup that is already full. And so oftentimes I allow my life to become so full with activity, busyness, whatever, that there's not enough margin. I think on the Camino, my cup was intentionally less full, where I was able to abide and to walk. And so that was one of the important lessons that it wasn't just a lesson that I knew in my head, but I was living it, with more simplicity on the Camino, with less responsibility. There was all that space, that margin for the Lord just to fill and to be present with him. And as I come back, as part of the challenge is I prepare to, another 6 weeks to re-engage into, ministry again. How do I maintain that margin so God has the space to fill me, that I may abide with him, not just work for him?
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. Yeah. I think one of the invitations of the Camino, and you can experience it in various degrees, is an invitation to kind of release control, release the outcome, go at the pace of God. Well, I know your congregation was invited into this journey with you in a way, and I thought it was really cool how you were talking about you're walking this solo pilgrimage, and you're even on this sabbatical with this Lily Grant, and your congregation is really partnering with you for the care of your soul, and it's good for the entire ministry, right? So I'm just curious if you could just briefly share, how did your congregation participate in your pilgrimage?
Sure. And before I do, let me just say shout out to the Lilly Foundation grant, because that's one of the things they have in the grant. If you are in pastoral ministry, is how are you going to engage your congregation? So it's a church grant, not a pastor grant,
Mhm.
right? So the congregation has ownership of this, and so it really forced me to think, and our leadership team to think of creative ways to do that. So we had gave some presentations of what I was going to be doing, so people got excited. They were able to read about the Camino, to understand what I was going to be doing. I gave before I left, I gave a sermon on pilgrimage. I
Mhm.
gave another message on presence, just trying to be present with the Lord, and read Psalm 84, which was a very formative chapter as well. Blessed are those whose hearts are set on pilgrimage.
Mhm.
One thing I ask, where he talks about just I'd rather have one day in the courts of the Lord than 1,000 elsewhere.
Mhm.
Um, so we did those things to prep, and then when I went on my Camino, the church is not supposed to have interaction with me, but I used Facebook, and then I used a blog where I was blogging updates,
Mhm.
and I didn't feel the pressure to blog every day.
Mhm.
It was only when I felt like I had something to say, but my congregation was able to track with that, to follow the journey. And Adam, I'm going to say this, and it sounds trite. It sounds like what we should say, but I will say this with every bit of honesty inside me. I could literally feel the prayers of my people. Like I could feel the people in my church that were lifting me up and just present with me emotionally, but also praying for God's hand of protection, His hand of guidance upon me, because they were vested. They were engaged with me. Now, I'm still not fully with them. When I get back in September, I'll be able to know more to an extent. But it was a real gift to be able to do that with them, as opposed to, oh, our pastor's on a 3-month vacation, and hopefully he comes back, right?
Mhm.
We really had this symbiotic type of
Mhm.
journey doing together, which was a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, I loved hearing you describe that close knit connection, that you were bringing them into the journey with you, and you could feel their prayers, and you were even taking some of their own prayers along with you.
So another way, if I can share this, because it was a high point for me, Adam, it really was. Before I went, I gave another message on bearing burdens and laying your burdens down before the Lord. Psalm 55, of course, First Peter, cast your cares upon the Lord, for He cares about you. And we talked about laying our burdens down. And so I shared about at the Cruz de Ferro, there is a cross that had been originally put up about the 11th, 12th century by some monks. And it's the highest point in the Camino. And people would lay down rocks, they would lay down burdens there, just sort of symbolic representations of things they wanted to leave behind. And so that's been going on for almost 1,000 years, where people at Cruz will lay things down. So I got this idea to say, how could I? Another way to bring my congregation is, I said to my church, if anybody has anything that you want to lay down, that you want to let go of and give to God, you obviously do that in prayer. But symbolically, I want to carry those things with me, and I want to lay them down at Cruz de Ferro as a means of symbolically laying them down at the cross.
Mhm.
And so we had over 100, 125, 150 people who wrote out things that they wanted to lay down. And those were turned in on 3x5 cards. We had someone enter those into a USB drive that was encrypted. And I
Mhm.
carried that encrypted USB drive with me the whole journey, prayed for those people. And then when we came to Cruz de Ferro, I laid down with my own thing I wanted to lay down. I laid down that thing. And it was a very emotional experience. I will tell you, when I first saw Cruz de Ferro, maybe a half an hour before I got there, the emotion, I started just to weep, because this is idea that I've been at that point walking 350 miles, and carrying this, and my congregation is with me, and I have my own burdens I'm laying down. One I had was a piece of jewelry from my wife, laying down my past 35-year journey with my wife that is no longer with me. And then I brought a key with me, symbolic of my future, and just giving that to God to unlock my future and trust Him to lead me. So I had those own things I was carrying myself that I wanted to symbolically lay down, and then I had these things I was carrying from my church. And it was a very emotional experience to think you're carrying those things with you for 350 miles, and you're praying about all that stuff, and you come to Cruz de Ferro, and you're just symbolically laying it down at the cross. It was a very moving moment for me, and a high point.
That is the coolest thing, man. That's the coolest thing I've heard about the Cruise to Pharaoh. And man, when you told me you were doing that, you ended up a day ahead of me, right before that experience. And so I didn't get to be there the same day you were there. But boy, when I knew that you were there having that experience, I was praying for you, man. I kind of wanted to look and see if I could find that little encrypted USB. I didn't. Of course, I was focused on my own laying down
Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
a
yeah.
symbolic rock that I had picked up from home and carried with me. Jim, as we start to land the plane here, short of taking 7 weeks off of work and traveling to Spain and walking the Camino themselves, how might those who are listening to this practice pilgrimage closer to home, including our own interior journey?
Great question. I think we have to find ways to break our natural rhythm and routine of life.
Okay.
So, here in Arizona, we have the Arizona Spiritual Formation Society of Arizona, which is, they do a great job. They offer, retreats, day retreats about every quarter. And so I did one of those last fall, a 24-hour silent retreat. There's a group of people doing a 3-day silent retreat. But I think taking little retreats like that are essential to get offline, to whether it's a silent retreat, some sort of a formation retreat. I would also say that just walking, I don't know about you, I'd be curious about your experience, but I enjoyed my training. Like I listened to podcasts, I prayed, I listened to worship music, I just reflected. But I mean, I enjoyed my training of just having that space to be just present and just to be able to walk, because I do think there's something about walking that just allows, at least me personally, to be able just to sort of get in this flow of trying to abide with the Lord. But
Yeah.
those are a couple of things I would say.
Yeah. Quick shout out to Ted and the SFSAZ that you just referenced. Good, incredible ministry, doing great things in Arizona. And the good news is they're expanding. And
They
there are
are.
actually spiritual formation societies popping up in the Ozarks, up in the Seattle Pacific Northwest area. Also, brand new online, SFSTX. Texas is starting a spiritual formation society under Ted and his team's leadership. So this is good. And many, I think this is a wave of God and a great opportunity for people to get engaged and do the kind of things you're talking about. Take advantage of these slow rhythms and learn how to live a different kind of a way, I think. Yeah, for me, the training was incredible, the long walks in preparation. Also, since I've been back, Jim, man, I can't stop moving. I want to go out and walk. I want to go out. I kind of didn't want it to end. And so I'm trying to find ways to keep it going. So,
That's the thing, isn't it, dude? I chose not to, to walk to from Eastad, where I think you did our Finisterre. I'm
yeah.
sorry. And the other locations. But yeah, it's a sense like you just feel like you're over there. Like I could just keep doing this. I felt like Forrest Gump. Like I could just keep going and going and going. Right. Like I didn't
Yeah.
want it to end.
When we were on the Camino, I think I'd like to maybe wrap this up with this. One of the things that we would say is we would greet other people and they would greet us was Buen Camino. It kind of means good path.
Yeah.
And I'm struck by the idea that wishing or blessing people on the path of life doesn't have to just be something that is reserved for your time on the Camino. So a Buen Camino, kind of a way of blessing others, is a posture I would like to carry with me. How might you, as a pastor and just as a person, find in your own spirit this sense of blessing others around you, maybe perhaps differently than before you walked the Camino? Like, how'd you like to carry that forward?
That's a really good question. I don't know if there's anything different. It's just a reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the ways that we bless people is seeing people,
Mm-hmm.
just allowing people to feel seen. And I think looking them in the eye, how
Mm-hmm.
are you doing? God bless you. It's just I think on the Camino, like I said, it became like, bikers are going by, Buen Camino, but there was something about that greeting, even though we would hear it dozens of times every day, right?
Hmm.
I mean, just, but there was something unique about you're in this journey together. We're doing
Yes.
this thing together. And I think that for me, one of the ways, obviously you can use words, you can use all kinds of things, but I think when I'm really abiding and I'm really in a good space, like abiding with the Lord, I really try to look at people. I try to see people. Um, and I think when you look someone in the eye and you can tell when you feel seen or you don't feel
Yeah.
seen, right?
Yeah.
We've all have felt brushed off, whatever. I
Hmm.
think in this world we live in, this hectic world we live in, it's a gift to in whatever ways it may look like, just helping people feel seen on their journey.
Hmm. Yeah. Can I add one thing to that, Jim? Um, Many people who probably listen to this podcast have also come across a short little movie called Godspeed. It's a movie starring Matt Canlis. Check it out. You're going to love it. Um, Starring is not the right word. Uh, he is an Anglican priest, and he was influenced by Eugene Peterson, one of his professors, and was encouraged to learn how to walk at the speed of God, really. And
Mm,
so it's a beautiful kind of combination with this idea of pilgrimage. But in that short little 30-minute movie, which I think you can probably find on YouTube, Eugene Peterson is being interviewed, and he says pretty pretty straightforward, pretty strong, that you really don't know someone until you know their name.
mm,
And that was one of the interesting things to me about walking the pilgrimage path, was getting to meet people and say their names
mm.
and remember their names. It was a strange thing for me. I don't know if it was for you, but I had more capacity to remember names than I do here. And I was surprised by how well I could remember someone's name. I'd see them 5 days later, right? And I'd be like, oh, yeah, so and so right there in front of me. And where did that come from? Why did I remember their names? But there's a knowing, a deep kind of intimate knowing that starts with our names and being able to really know somebody's name. And so added to that idea of seeing someone, listening to someone, there's just something so personal, so intimate, so like reaching to deeper places of our souls when
Mm.
we are seen and when our names are known. And
That's
that's
powerful.
another thing I think I'd like to bring with me
Yeah.
into this space, is that I don't become so busy, so hurried, so consumed in my stuff that I lose the capacity to be present enough to ask someone their name and actually remember it.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. That's awesome. Is there anything else that you brought back with you that you haven't shared about, just things you're trying to bring back with you or to apply as you engage in the real world?
well, I think like I already mentioned, keep moving. I'm trying to keep on being in a moving kind of embodied kind of a practice. For me, you were talking about acedia earlier. For me, like sitting in my chair and having my prayer time in the morning with God is a wonderful, sweet experience and contemplative, and I love it. I love centering prayer and a lot of other things. But to get up and go and not just think about what I'm doing as I go as my exercise time, but my actual embodied spiritual practice of being with God out in the beauty of nature. I did hear this on the Camino. I listened to the Dallas Willard podcast, an episode a day. He was kind of like my teacher, my guide. It was a really powerful man. But towards the end, he actually just made this little comment. He said, "Beauty is goodness being made present to our senses." And so for me to like get up from my chair, go out into nature and experience the goodness of God being made present to my senses, fully made present to my senses, is something I don't want to. I don't want to get back to that place where I've got my morning prayer time and then I've got my exercise, right? And those are two different things. When you're on the Camino, it's all one thing, and it's a
Yes.
beautiful thing.
Beautiful thing. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, Jim, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. I loved meeting you. I'm so glad that we are able to be in contact with each other here. One final thing I want to say, and I hope everybody will hear this. You were a day ahead of me from just a bit before that Cruise de Faro experience, all the way through to Santiago. You were so kind and gracious to me. I was a solo pilgrim too. You texted me, you're like, dude, what time are you going to be here in Santiago? I want to be here to greet you, to see you come into the square. I told you it was going to be early, like 7:30 a.m. And you're like, I'll be there. And you were there with your video camera going, and I came through that little tunnel. There's hardly anyone else in the square at that point in time, but you were there, and you embodied that faithful presence of somebody who's witnessing our journey. Mm. And you probably have no idea how powerful that was for me. Mm. And I want to just say thank you.
Well, it was a gift to be there for you. I was so proud of you, and it was a great connection we had. And it was a blessing to be there to meet you and to see you come through and to see you walk through that thing. And you were so humble. Like, there's a humility to think you spent so much time preparing for this, right? And you dream about it. And it's such a moving experience for these 30, 40 days when you walk it. And it was a joy to be there with you. And I received just being there with you. And so it was a gift to see you come through those doors.
I just want to say thank you. It's a very pastoral thing. But I know that you were not functioning as a pastor in that moment. You were functioning as a friend and as a witness, like I said. And I just want to encourage everybody, who can you bear witness to? Who can you kind of point out and name and say, hey, I am with you on your journey. I want to see and celebrate with you all the great things God is doing in your life. Because that was a powerful moment for me. And I think we all need people like that in our lives. And so I would just pray that not only would we be asking the question, God, who is that faithful witness in our lives, but how can we be a faithful witness in the lives of others? So Thank you so much. I hope that you'd be willing to come back on the podcast in the future, because I think your sabbatical experience has been really powerful. And that whole Lily Grant idea and that theme of adventure and presence is so good. I think I would like to have a podcast episode that really talks about sabbatical in particular, and maybe you'd be willing to come back and give us some of that wisdom when the time's right.
I would love to.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy to talk to you. It's a gift to be able to meet you and to hear your heart and your ministry you're doing, Adam. And thank you for having me. It's been a great joy.
On June 18th, my 27th day on the Camino, I came upon a small mountain village just inside the region of Galicia. The town is called Osabrero, and it hosts, among many things, a small chapel with a lot of history, especially as it relates to the Camino. I enjoyed a pilgrim mass there that evening, which included a blessing at the end. On the wall of that church is a Spanish poem. It's called the Prayer of La Faba, and I'd like to share it with you as it's translated into English. Even though I have traveled all the roads, crossed mountains and valleys from east to west, if I have not discovered the freedom to be myself, I have not gotten anywhere. Even if I'd shared all my goods with people of another language and culture, made friends with pilgrims of 1,000 paths, or shared hostels with saints and princes, if I am not able to forgive my neighbor tomorrow, I have not gotten anywhere. Even though I carried my backpack from start to finish and waited for every pilgrim in need of encouragement, or gave my bed to whomever came after and given my bottle of water in exchange for nothing, if back at my house and my work I am not capable to create fraternity and to bring joy, peace, and unity, I have not gotten anywhere. Even if I had food and water every day and enjoyed a roof and shower every night, or I would have been well cared for in my wounds, if I have not discovered in all this the love of God, I have not gotten anywhere. Even though I had seen all the monuments and contemplated the best sunsets, even if I had learned a greeting in every language or tasted clean water from all sources, if I have not discovered who is the author of so much free beauty and so much peace, I have not gotten anywhere. If from today I do not continue walking in his ways, seeking and living as learned, if from today I do not see in each person, friend and foe, a companion on the road, if from today I do not recognize God, the God of Jesus of Nazareth, as the only God of my life, I have not gotten anywhere. That, my friends, is a powerful message. This is the way. Until next time, Buen Camino,